Many of us like to travel, whether you're going halfway around the world to climb a mountain or scuba diving on a coral reef or simply jumping in your car to drive to a nice hotel for a weekend break. Your trip will most likely involve some planning. Today, we'll look at some useful vocabulary you can use when you plan your trip. And we'll speak about what we do before we travel anywhere. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are things, Craig?
Things are very good, thank you. I'm really looking forward to speaking about travel, one of my favourite topics on the podcast this week. But before we get started, and I always forget, I want to remind you, if you're listening, if you're interested in getting news from us and also a review of all the podcasts we publish, sign up for the email list on inglespodcast.com and you'll get an email every month or sometimes twice a month with the latest news about Reza and I and the podcast. So, holidays and travel, we have spoken about that before, haven't we?
We have in previous episodes from quite a long time ago. This is episode 490, but if you go way back to episodes 108 and 156, you'll find episodes on specifically air travel vocabulary. That's 108. So if you want to find it, just type in inglespodcast.com/108, or the other episode was about holidays and travel, but not specifically planning. That's what we're talking about today, but holidays and travel in general. That was episode 156. There's a couple of links in the show notes to these episodes.
And you'll find the show notes at inglespodcast.com/490, which is the number of this episode. Wow, we're nearly at 500, Reza. What are we going to do for the 500th episode? That's an important event.
We're going to have to celebrate somehow. We'll think of something, but we've got to celebrate 500. It's a lot of episodes for any podcast.
Yeah, maybe we'll take a trip somewhere. Speaking of travel, Maria Jesus from Avilés in Asturias has been travelling. Let's find out where she's been.
Hello, Reza and Craig. This is Maria Jesus from Asturias. I want to thank you so much for your podcast. That's really helped us a lot with our English. Reza, this summer I went to visit your country. I went to Ireland. I stayed in Dublin City only for a week and we tried to visit the most of the Isle. We had the opportunity to go to a lot of places and I can say that I like all of them as much as I expected. I found Dublin City really interesting and I could go to Belfast only for an hour, but I could visit the main attractions. And I think it's an amazing city. I enjoyed a lot going to your pubs and listening to your traditional Irish music that I think it's beautiful. As you can imagine, there were left a lot of places we couldn't visit because we didn't have enough time. And so I'm really looking forward to coming back to Ireland in the future because it is worth it. Thank you for everything and a big hug for both of you. Bye-bye.
And a big hug to you too, Maria Jesus, and thank you so much for that lovely email you sent us and your kind words. And it's the reason we do this, isn't it, Reza, for the things that Maria Jesus mentioned in her email?
Yes, a big hug from me too, Maria Jesus. Thanks for your audio message and thanks for the email you sent. I'm really happy that you went to Ireland and you enjoyed it. That's makes me feel really, really glad because, I am proud of my own country. I think it's worth a visit. I'm glad you went to my city, Belfast. I'm glad you went to Dublin as well. It's a very, very nice place. I would only have one criticism of Dublin, but Irish people have the same criticism. Did you notice how expensive it is? It's gone a bit crazy. Apart from that, fantastic, but boy, is it expensive in Dublin these days. But I'm glad you enjoyed the city. Me too. And thanks so much for your kind words. And do go back again. And if we ever find our way up to Asturias, maybe we'll call in and see you. You're right. Asturias is quite like Ireland. You mentioned that in your email. Yes, Asturias, like Ireland, has very beautiful green scenery.
And also, thank you, Maria Jesus, for your suggestion to speak about El Camino de Santiago in a future podcast. We will do that. I've taken a note, and St. James's Way will be a topic of a future podcast.
I'd just like to mention a couple of things about your voice message, Maria Jesus. It was extremely clear and I could understand absolutely everything you said. So that's a job well done. However, you did say a couple of little things which I think we could improve. You said that you tried to visit and you said the most of the Isle. Isle is another way of saying island. That's okay. But I wouldn't say the most of. I would say try to visit most of the Isle. Drop the word the. Or maybe you could say you try to visit the majority of the Isle. Yeah, it's the same thing. So you could say most of the Isle, no the. Or you could say the majority of the Isle. And one other tiny little thing, it's a classic mistake. I'm so used to it, I'm so accustomed to it that sometimes I forget to mention it, but let's mention it. You said, I enjoyed a lot going to your pubs. It should be, I enjoyed going to your pubs a lot. A lot always goes at the end, after the thing you enjoyed. It's a classic Spanish mistake. But the order is, I enjoyed going to your pubs a lot. And I'm very glad to hear it. Cheers.
Sloncha.
Yeah, sloncha in Irish, yeah.
So it was quite convenient that Maria Jesus spoke about her trip, because that's the topic of today's podcast, but more planning a trip than looking at the vocabulary of travel. Rezo, are you a planner when you travel, or are you more of a spontaneous traveler?
I'm going to leave it up to you to guess before I tell you the answer. Since you know me quite well, what do you think?
I would say you're a planner. I think you like to plan in advance, generally speaking. That's not to say you can't be spontaneous during the trip, but I think you like to have a good idea where you're going, the days you're traveling, and what you're doing. Is that right?
That's right. I am quite a serious planner when it comes to trips, but I also I factor into my plan a certain amount of free time that I will decide what to do with when I'm there. But it's planned in. So what I'm saying is I do plan, but I don't plan every single hour. I go out of my way, let's say I have a week, to leave at least a day, maybe even a day and a half, to see what happens. But I'm going to know where I'll be probably, but I don't plan anything specific. I wait to see what I like when I get there and then do certain things depending on what I like. But the things that I know I definitely want to do, I plan in advance. In other words, I mix it a little bit, so it's mostly planned, but also I factor in a little bit of flexibility.
Have you ever been anywhere at the drop of a hat with no planning whatsoever? At the drop of a hat means just immediately, without thinking, just going. For example, jumping in a car and going on a road trip. Have you ever done that?
Actually, no. I have to admit I haven't. And you?
I can remember once I drove to Paris with a friend, and that was at the drop of a hat. He was visiting from America, and I was teaching in the UK, and I had a free weekend. I think it was a long weekend. We had about 3 or 4 days. And he said, I know someone in Paris. Let's go to Paris. And we got in the car and we drove. immediately. So at the drop of a hat, we went on a trip to Paris. Yeah.
Oh, I envy you. I like the spontaneity of that.
Yeah, I don't do it often. But occasionally I think it's fun. Before we look at the actual planning of a trip, let's focus specifically on one or two items of vocabulary that are sometimes confused. Now, to travel is obviously a verb. I like to travel. I'm traveling tomorrow. But we don't use travel as a countable noun. We use the word trip. For example, I'm going on a trip. A common mistake that we often hear is I'm going on a travel. No, a travel is an uncountable noun and a verb. So use trip. I'm going on a trip, or to go on holiday, to go on vacation. Holiday, the British English word. Vacation is the American English word.
There is one exception to that very important rule, which Craig's just mentioned. There's always an exception, isn't there? There is one set fixed expression, which is on my travels, where the word travel is being used as a countable, and it has to be plural, on my travels, but it's a fixed expression. Apart from that, we never use travel as a countable noun. So you can use it as uncountable. You can say travel is good for your well-being. So travel being used as a noun.
Travel broadens the mind.
Travel broadens the mind, but we never use it as a countable noun, except that one exception. For example, on my travels, I've seen a lot of strange things. That's the only exception.
Have you ever read the book Gulliver's Travels?
Ah, there you go. Yeah, on his travels, on Gulliver's Travels,
Yeah.
yes. I have read that very good Irish book written by Jonathan Swift from Dublin, by the way, since we were talking about Ireland. Yeah. A lot of credit for great literature in English goes wrongly to the English when it should go to the Irish. So yes, Jonathan Swift, that Irish writer, wrote that very good book. Yes.
Gulliver's Travels. So, number one in our list of planning a trip and tips and advice is research your destination. Remember, the collocation with research is do. So do your research. That means how you're going to get there, how you're traveling, things to do when you're there, any activities or excursions, day trips that you want to do. Maybe you're going to look for a local guide to show you around and do some walking tours of the city or area. And you'll probably go sightseeing. Reza, what are the sights in a city and what does sightseeing mean?
Well, if I use the word sight as an uncountable noun, it means being able to see. So if I use it as a countable noun, a sight is something worth seeing, something that you perhaps should see. So sightseeing is when you go to see, to look at the nice things to look at, the important things to look at, the typical things to see in a city. If you do that, you're sightseeing.
What are the sights in London?
So, for example, if I went sightseeing in London, I would probably go to see the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, the River Thames, Buckingham Palace. I might go to the British Museum, places like that.
They could also be called attractions because they are things that attract tourists. So you go sightseeing and you go to see the attractions. But be careful of tourist traps. What are they? What is a tourist trap?
Yes, so you want to plan the things that you're going to do, but also plan the things that you need to avoid. So tourist traps are the things which are there waiting for tourists. Not local people, because local people know about them because they live in the city, but tourists don't know. You think, oh, this seems like a good idea and a really good thing to do as a tourist. I'll go to this place, or I'll buy this thing, or I'll go to this restaurant, and you will get extremely bad value for money. You will be charged a lot of money for not very much in return.
Do you think Valencia has tourist traps?
Not really. Not many that I can think of. Can you think of any?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a tourist trap exactly, but if you go to the beach here in Valencia It's very tempting, it's very easy, and it looks the perfect plan to go to have lunch in one of the restaurants along the beach. There's a promenade, there's a lovely area where you can walk next to the beach, and it's full of restaurants. However, they're a little bit expensive. Yes, you get the view of the sea, but my recommendation would be to go back from the sea 1 or 2 roads and look for a restaurant that probably has better food at a lower price. So it's not exactly a tourist trap, but it's just a piece of advice.
Yeah. There are some world famous tourist traps, yet tourists, still fall for them time and time again. One of the classics is, for example, having a coffee in St. Mark's in Venice.
In Venice.
Yeah. Okay. Have a coffee. Hope you enjoy it, because it's going to cost you about €8. So
Probably more.
or more. So it had better be a good coffee, hadn't it? Or you could do what my parents did. They told me my dad never liked to spend money unnecessarily. He was a bit stingy. He went to St. Mark's Square with a flask because he had heard of the tourist square. And my mum almost died of embarrassment.
A flask of tea or coffee.
A thermos, yeah. As you say in Spanish, un termo, a thermos flask. So he brought his own coffee from a flask, which he had made in the hotel for nothing, and had it in St. Mark's Square. And he was so happy to have saved between the two of them about €16. That made his day. He was so happy.
Well, maybe that's our first tip today. Take a thermos flask when you go to an expensive place, and then you'll save money on your drinks. But speaking of money, it's very important to budget your holiday, your vacation. So to budget for a trip is to work out or calculate how much money you have to spend on your holiday. Now, obviously, you can save money by camping on a campsite with a tent, or you can stay in a 5 or 6 star hotel. You can travel first class, and you can hire a car, or you can travel by public transport. So all of these factors, all of these decisions should be inside your budget, the amount of money that you have to spend.
Well, let me talk more about what I know about. I had never even heard of a 6-star hotel, but I have heard of all-inclusive package tours, and I do know about no-frills travel. That's more my cup of tea. So if something is all-inclusive, you pay in advance and you get everything, or most things. You know, the classic thing the British tourists pay for when they go to Benidorm or Magaluf or somewhere like that.
Or Mexico, like Tim.
Yeah, it can be far away as well. But particularly in Spain, you see a lot of them. They come and you think, why do they spend all day at the hotel drinking? They could go outside. Yeah, because they've already paid for the drinks at the hotel, so they're going to drink them. So you could get an all-inclusive package tour, or no frills, or low budget. That means it's cheap and you won't be getting anything fancy. You'll just be getting the basics. That could be a hotel. It could also refer to an airline. And if you want to save as much money as possible on accommodation, rather than go to a 5 or 6 star hotel, you might go backpacking. So with everything you have on your back, yeah, the old mochila, as you say in Spanish.
With your flask.
Your flask, yeah, don't forget the flask. If you're going to expensive piazzas, you go backpacking and you will stay in budget places. You might even stay in a youth hostel, or you might even go camping.
And speaking of money and budgeting, make sure you tell your bank before you go, because you'll probably be traveling with a credit card, or probably more than one credit card. And these credit cards have limits. If you extend the limit that you can use your credit card for the period of your holiday, then if you have a medical problem, an emergency, you need some extra money, then you have that extra money on your credit card to use if you need it. And if you're traveling with cash, which you probably should take a little bit of cash or local currency, keep it in different places. If you're traveling with a partner, divide it between the two of you, some in your partner's bag, some in your bag. Also maybe hide some in another bag that you have. So divide your money up. If you lose some of the money or you have a bad experience and some get stolen, you have a reserve money in another part of your luggage.
Yes, and I like what Craig said about traveling with some local currency. Some, but not too much. Particularly if it's a weak currency, a currency with a weak exchange rate, because you'll have to pay commission to change it. And if you don't use it, it's pretty useless after you leave the country. For example, I have some currency from Cuba, from when I was on holiday in Cuba. I spent nearly all of it, but not quite all of it. But there's no way I can do anything with it outside Cuba. So I'm just waiting for my next holiday to Cuba to go back and spend it. So don't change any more than you need to avoid paying commission for nothing.
That's a very good tip. Now, obviously, one thing you have to bear in mind and consider is the time of year that you're traveling, not only because of the local weather conditions, but also the price of the airfares. If you have the flexibility to travel off-season or off-peak, we could say, P-E-A-K, when the fares are lower and fewer tourists are traveling, then you're going to find lower rates. You'll be paying less money, not only on the flights, but also in the hotels.
Also, local festivals. Thinking of coming to Valencia? Fine. When are you coming? The middle of March? Okay, let's think about this. Do you know about the fallas? If you're coming for the fallas, great. But if you're not coming for the fallas, I'm not so sure it's a great idea, because the city becomes organized anarchy. So you need to know about it. You need to know about local festivals.
Before we continue with this week's podcast, we just want to let you know that you can now improve your English with both of us personally. That's not at the same time, but we both will help you in different ways to improve your English. With me, you can join one of my conversation courses, and that means you'll be in a small group of lovely students, and together we will have discussions and debates and role plays and lots of different activities that are all designed to help you improve your fluency and your confidence when you're speaking English. And for more information, just send me an email, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, at inglespodcast.com. And Reza, you also offer classes online, correct?
That's right. But my focus or speciality is more with one-to-one, with individuals. So if you'd like a one-to-one individual class to focus on your particular needs, you could get in touch with me. Just send me an email to belfastreza@gmail.com.
And now let's get back to the podcast. So we've spoken about the research you need to do, the time of year, and your budget for your holiday. During your research, you're probably looking at flights, hotels, accommodation. So make sure you make your reservations in advance, including car hire. If you're going to be hiring a car, make sure you do that in advance. Also, any tours that you might be interested in taking, sometimes you need to book those and reserve those in advance. The London Eye, for example. Don't go to London and expect to get on the London Eye at a time you want for the next day, for the following day. You have to book that well in advance.
Do you know the expression, listeners, do as I say, not as I do? Or do you know the expression, practice what you preach? Yeah, well, I didn't practice what I preach. So here we are telling you to do things in advance, like reservations, car hire. Someone gave me a very good tip about car hire in Belfast the last time I went there, but I didn't bother to book it in advance. And it was a real bargain. It was going to be like £25 a day, which is really cheap. I didn't listen to them. So I just got there and I phoned the company. They said, oh yeah, about these deals you got, £25 a day. This was in August. They said, yeah, the first one we got available is at the end of September. And I called at the beginning of August. Yeah, okay, I should have planned that better. So I ended up phoning other companies, and the cheapest they had was like £85 a day. So I didn't even bother to hire a car in the end because it just wasn't worth it, because I didn't do it in advance. So practice what you preach. Yeah, I didn't. I'm telling you to plan in advance, and I didn't. And as a result, I wasn't able to hire a car because there was no way I was going to pay the expensive prices for people who didn't plan in advance.
And speaking of planning in advance, and Reza, you might identify with this as well, make sure your passport is up to date before you go. You should not travel on a passport that has less than 6 months on it. So make sure your passport has 6 months or more validity, that it's valid for 6 months or more, and also a visa. If you need a visa where you're going, make sure you apply for your visa well in advance. And your itinerary. The itinerary is what you're going to do at your destination. Tours, excursions, as I mentioned before. But one thing to remember, if you're traveling far, you may have jet lag when you arrive. So you may feel really tired the first day. You may feel like resting. So don't put too many activities in the first day or two if you're traveling to a different time zone and you suffer from the time difference or the jet lag.
Speaking of flights, you need to know what type of flights you've booked. Sometimes it's not so clear, or if you don't check carefully, you can have a nasty surprise. Not all flights are direct. Sometimes you have to get a connecting flight. So you might buy a flight from Valencia to, let's say, Istanbul. And you think, oh, I get on the plane in Valencia and get off in Istanbul. But you didn't read all the details. You didn't look at the itinerary. And in fact, you have to fly to Madrid.
Or Miami.
Madrid, then Miami, and then somewhere else. And
in Caracas.
25 hours later, you end up in Istanbul. So check that it's either a direct flight, or if you know there's going to be connecting flights, factor in the possibility that you might miss one. So if you just miss one connecting flight and you got more than one, that's going to be a big problem. You may even have to do a stopover. A stopover is when you have a connecting flight which requires you to actually sleep in a place which is not your destination. So on a long haul flight, a flight which is a long distance, let's say you're going from Spain to Hong Kong, for example, you might end up having to sleep in Abu Dhabi because your connecting flight changes there, but you have to wait 12 hours in the meantime, and it's the evening. You'll have to go to a hotel and do a stopover.
Yeah, we've got listeners in Australia, haven't we? There's Juan, and I know Alberto, friend of the show. He's over in Valencia at the moment, or in the Valencia region. So obviously traveling halfway around the world, it's a really good idea to have a stopover and have a rest in the middle if you can. You also may need vaccinations, or another word for vaccination is a jab, J-A-B. So make sure you get your jabs if you're traveling to a country where you might catch a disease, for example. Now, most people these days travel with their phones, and a lot of things connected to travel is now on your phone. So make sure you download guides, digital maps, any apps that you might need on your phone, maybe a translation app so that you can communicate with people in a foreign country who don't speak your language. And you may even need a SIM card that's different from your SIM card in your phone, especially if Wi-Fi is not widely available in the country you're visiting. Notice the pronunciation there of Wi-Fi. Make sure you check with your mobile phone provider so that you have internet where you go. So that's a very good point. Check to make sure you're not paying for it, paying too much money. Next on the list, number 6, is packing. You pack your suitcase. Now, I have a checklist for travel. I don't know if you have one, Reza, but wherever I go, I print out my travel list, and one by one, I cross off the things as they go in the suitcase. Now, when we're talking about suitcases, make sure you check with your airline company the measurements. Are you checking in a suitcase if you're only taking a bag on the plane with you, so carry-on luggage? What are the measurements? Because if your carry-on bag is bigger than the measurements on the webpage of the company you're flying with, then you probably will have to pay more at the airport. So make sure you check that on their website.
Another thing is, how do you put your clothes into the bag? I'm a big fan of rolling. For years now, I've been rolling rather than folding. So to fold is when you, let's say you had a t-shirt which was 80 by 40, the measurements. So I move it so that it's now half the size with a line in the middle. So it's now 40 by 20. I folded it. As you say in Spanish, plegar or doblar. But you shouldn't do that because there's more chance of your clothes creasing like that, getting lines in them. Apparently, if you roll them, like a toilet roll, in a tube, there's far less chance of them getting creased. As well as that, I have the feeling that it occupies less space. Or, if you've got like an awkward space in the corner, you're not sure what to do with, roll something and stick it in there so you don't have any empty spaces.
So that's how you roll, is it?
Yeah. Oh, very good. That's how I roll, yeah.
That's how he rolls. That's how he behaves. That's what he does. Very good tip. Now, I suggest taking some old clothes when you travel. Why? Well, if you're going to throw clothes away, why not throw them away at your destination? Then you have more room in your suitcase for buying souvenirs and bringing things back with you. Also, make sure you put a clean t-shirt and a change of underwear in your carry-on bag on the plane. Why? Well, has it ever happened to you where your checked-in suitcase hasn't arrived at your destination, especially if you had to change planes at a stopover or something? So make sure you've got that clean change of clothes with you. That can give you a day or two before your suitcase arrives at its destination, if it doesn't arrive with you on the plane.
I've been doing that since I can remember, always. Clean underwear, clean socks, probably a clean t-shirt is something I always have in my hand baggage. Absolutely always. More important than anything else.
And make sure you photocopy important documents and keep them in a different place to where your original documents are. I'm talking about your visas, passports, any health insurance. Photocopy those important documents. If you lose them, it's much easier to get them replaced if you have a photocopy of the details. Oh, and one more thing, I nearly forgot. Plastic bag. Take a plastic bag with you. Why? Well, you can put your dirty washing in your plastic bag. You don't want dirty washing mixing with your clean clothes in your suitcase. And when you're going through security in the airport, it's good to have a plastic bag to put all your small things, your keys, your wallet, your mobile phone in that plastic bag. It makes the process much quicker. And if you get caught in the rain, in the mud, while you're away, you can always put your muddy shoes or boots in a plastic bag before they go in the suitcase. Oh, and one more thing. You can use a plastic bag in the sink of a hotel if there's no plug. The plug is the piece of rubber that stops the water disappearing in the sink. So very often in hotels, you have a sink, but there's no plug, especially with the budget of my hotels. So you can just put a plastic bag at the bottom and wash your clothes or have a shave in the sink, and the sink fills up with water if there's no plug.
Another tip we've got for you is about the check-in. Check-in online, on internet, as soon as possible to avoid double book seats. Now, in theory, it shouldn't happen. If you paid for a ticket, you should have a seat. But in reality, it can happen. Sometimes they sell more seats, the airline sells more seats than they really have.
Double booking.
Double booking, there's nothing you can do about it. They'll say very sorry and refund your money, but you may have already paid for hotels and lots of other things. And then what are you going to do? You can't get there. So check in online as soon as you can, but be careful. It's a bit like the intricacies of suitcase dimensions. Every single airline has different rules, different sizes. You need to read each one individually. The same goes for online check-in. Sometimes it's free, sometimes you pay. With some companies, if it's up to 2 weeks in advance, it's free. But if it's further than 2 weeks in advance, you pay. With others, it can only be 2 days in advance free. Otherwise, you pay. So read the small print. Yeah, read what it says, the tiny little details about online check-in. It would be silly to pay 30 euros for online check-in Monday when you could have got it free on Tuesday. Just wait to Tuesday if you can, if you don't want to spend 30 euros.
And I'm sure some people listening prefer to travel with their boarding pass and their ticket on their mobile phone. And there's probably people who are maybe more old school. I don't want to say old fashioned, but you prefer printing your boarding pass and taking it with you as a piece of paper.
You've got one in front of you. I always print.
Yeah.
I never use my phone for
Well, my advice, Reza, is to do both. If it's only on your phone and your battery runs out or you lose your phone, you can't get on the flight. If you have a barcode or a QR code on a piece of paper and for some reason at the airport the machine cannot scan it, and that happened recently with a flight where somebody had to pay nearly 200 euros for another boarding pass, you don't want to be in that position. I would take both. Print out your boarding pass, make sure it's available on your phone, and then you've covered every base.
Yeah. I think these days pretty much you automatically will have it in an email somewhere. They send it to you in an email. So it's going to be there anywhere, isn't it? So I know it's on my phone somewhere if I need it, but so far I haven't had to do it. But I guess if it didn't work on paper someday, I could just show them the PDF that they sent me, I guess. But I like to keep things simple and basic. And I know one thing, paper doesn't need a battery. That's one thing I know. It's as simple as that.
Now, sometimes I get a little bit stressed before I leave to travel and go on a trip. Have I got everything? Did I pack everything I need? What did I forget? Go down the list again. But if you always do this before you go out the door, you can avoid any difficult situations. The 3 things you need before you go on a trip: your passport, your ticket, and your money. If you've got those 3 things, everything else can be managed.
And don't worry if you've forgotten something else that isn't on the list, because as Craig mentioned earlier, clothes, for example, he gave you the tip of bringing old clothes, which you were maybe going to throw away anyway. Throw them away when you get there. And quite often you find, surprisingly, when you go on holiday, that certain items are cheaper in your destination than where you came from. So don't panic.
Exactly. So we hope these tips have been useful for you. Remember, you can see them all on the webpage at inglespodcast.com/490 in the show notes. But before we go, we've got some very quick tips for you, some bonus tips of things that you could do while you're traveling to avoid any inconveniences. One is to put a business card in the key card slot in a hotel room. When you check into a hotel, you get a key. It's not a physical key, it's an electronic key. It's a piece of plastic, which is more or less the size of a credit card or a business card. And when you go into your room, you put that in a small slot on the wall, and that puts the lights on and engages the electricity. But then what happens if you leave the room and you forget it? Now you've locked yourself out, you don't have your key, you have to go down to reception, get another key. I always use a business card and not my room key. My room key always stays with me. So that's one tip.
I didn't know this, Craig, until you'd written that. So any card will activate the lights, the electricity, etc.
Usually works, not always, but very, very often. Put a business card in there and that will activate the lights.
So it's just the actual lock of the door which is sensitive to their particular
Usually.
key. This is a really good tip. I'm going to do that from now on.
Also, ask to see the room before you accept it, if it's possible, just to make sure you're getting a clean and comfortable room.
Yeah, because just think about it. If it's a hotel, particularly the type of hotel I tend to go to, which won't be so expensive, some of the rooms might be okay and some not so great. And they think, well, let's see if we can, get rid of this room, which hardly anybody ever wants on this guy. But if you say, can I see the room first? They might think, all right, yeah, we'd better give him a decent room or he might not take it. But hey, if you don't complain, they'll give you the bad room,
The first thing I always do when I go into a hotel room is take off the cover on the bed, which can be called a bedspread. So it's that cover that covers the bed and the cushions that they put on top of the bed cover. Now, you'll probably have clean sheets and clean pillows and pillowcases. I hope you have. I've slept in hotels that didn't have them, but I'm sure you will have clean sheets. But I don't think they ever wash those horrible cushions and that horrible bed cover that's been there time and time again after guest after guest after guest. So the first thing I do is I take off that bed cover and those cushions.
Another thing is to check how comfortable the mattress is. I don't know about you, but I find it really hard to sleep on an uncomfortable mattress. Everybody has their own likes and dislikes. I like quite a hard mattress.
But it's probably going to be the same in every room, isn't it?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Would you complain if you got a mattress you didn't like?
Depends on how much I was paying. If it was a really cheap hotel, no, because, hey, what do you want for the price? But I have been in a 4-star hotel, which was fairly expensive. I did say in advance, I said, is it a nice hard mattress? And they said, yeah, don't worry. I got to the room, it wasn't. And I said, hey, listen, I don't want that mattress. I asked for a hard one. And they changed it. They did change it. They didn't give me a new mattress. They just took one from another bed, which was harder. So yeah, I stood my ground and I got my comfortable mattress.
Also, take a photo of your room number and your hotel name. It's happened to me a couple of times. I've left the hotel, gone to walk around, got lost, and I couldn't remember the name of the hotel. I didn't have my phone, or I couldn't find it on my phone. And make sure you know where you're staying. It sounds silly, but some people don't do this. And also the room number. Maybe the receptionist isn't there. They can't find your room. Make sure you know your room number and your hotel name.
I always do that, Craig. I've been doing that for years. And if you happen to be driving, well, if they have their own car park and you're using that, great. If not, if you've parked in the street, I always take a photo of the name of the street, and preferably if I can get it with my car in it, so I don't forget where I parked the car. It's easily done. You park, you don't use the car for a couple of days, and then it's, oh crumbs, where did I leave the car? So make a note of the street where you've parked your car as well.
And don't always trust the hotel safe, especially if you're staying in a low budget hotel. All of the cleaners, all the hotel staff, they may have access to a key that opens every safe. And one tip that I saw on a YouTube video is to take a bulldog clip. That's a very strong, large clip that you use to hold lots of pieces of paper together, but it's very strong and very firm. And if you have a passport at the top of the curtains, you can clip the passport to the back of the curtains so that it is out of sight, and make sure it's on the extreme right or the extreme left, so that when the curtains are opened, it doesn't move. So don't put it in the middle, because it might be seen if the cleaner opens the curtains. But if it's on one side or the other, it won't be seen. You can hide your passport behind that. And in some hotels, if you're not 100% sure of the security, that might be safer than putting it in the safe.
Wow, that's a really good tip. I'd never thought of that.
I'll tell you another good tip. Make sure you clean and sterilize the remote control. You don't know where it's been. You don't know who's been touching it. You don't know what foreign liquids might be on that remote control, so make sure you clean that. That's something I always do.
That's something I've always done as well because, not everybody washes their hands as much as I would like them to. And one other thing, take earplugs or noise-cancelling earphones. So they're special earphones which block out the sound. Because you might have noisy people in the room next door to you, or the hotel in general might be noisy. They might have a wedding or something, or some kind of special event where they're making lots of noise. So the first thing is ask for a quiet room if you can get one, but they might not have any. But this is an extra precaution. Also, if you're like me and you don't like to see light when you sleep, this bothers me a lot. I don't like excessive light. For me, the darker a room, the better to sleep. So usually I also pack an eye mask. One of those things you put on your eyes to sleep at night, just in case a lot of light comes through the window.
That's a very good idea. I like the suggestion of the earplugs and the noise-cancelling headphones or earphones. Also very handy, very useful if you have young kids behind you in the aeroplane. And don't leave home without your sense of humour and a lot of patience. That's possibly my biggest tip. Be flexible, because things don't always go the way you plan or the way you want. So go with the flow. Just take it easy, be patient, and enjoy your vacation. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Do you have any tips and advice about travel that perhaps Reza and I haven't mentioned here? We would love to hear them. Reza, how can people send us a voice message?
You could use SpeakPipe. There's a link in the show notes. It's speakpipe.com/English podcast. Just remember that there's a 90-second, a minute and a half maximum to the length of the recording. But Craig, what if people want to write to us?
You can reach us by email. Emails go to me, Craig, Craig, @inglespodcast.com, and to Reza, send your emails to belfastreza, Reza, @gmail.com.
This podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Why not visit the online store? There's a link in the show notes to store, store, .mansioningles.net, and there you'll see a range of interesting products to further help you improve your English.
And before we go out the door this week, we'd like to say a huge thank you and show our appreciation to our Patreon supporters. And you too can join our Patreon program. It will cost you as little as $1.50 per month. And with that, you get instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast so that you can read all of the words that we say. Go to patreon.com/English podcast.
We'd like to mention the names of all of our sponsors, but we just haven't got time. So as usual, we'll mention our most recent sponsors who've just joined us. They are Esteban Sanchez, Maria Jose Cuenca Bonilla, Carcopu, and Pablo Albert. A big thanks to you and all our sponsors.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, one thing I like to do when I travel is to try the local cakes and pastries. And that's what we're going to be talking about on next week's podcast. So if you have a sweet tooth like me, join us next week for a podcast on cakes and pastry vocabulary. Until then, have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. And the music today was by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.